It was in 2015 that I left the UK for what I thought was going to be the adventure of a lifetime. Little did I know that within days I would become embroiled in an industry rife with animal exploitation, cruelty and lies. From a single trip, my life was changed forever as I learnt firsthand about the callous world of cub petting and the tragedy facing lions and their cubs across South Africa. After researching the best place to help in conservation of lions, I found a sanctuary offering hands-on experience with cubs that would be raised and released back into their natural habitat. It was only when I arrived I learnt about the brutal reality. Now I'm heading back across the world to learn more about the lion trade and the harmful repercussions of cub petting and the benefits of ethical volunteering. Growing up, I've always been passionate about wildlife and one animal in particular, the king of the jungle, the lion. Everywhere you turn in modern society there are lions. Logos, statues, films and TV. There's no escaping them. They represent pride, power, strength and resilience. I've always been aware of the threat that lions face both in the wild and in captivity, the cruelty of some humans and the prevailing aggression of hunters. And so when I began looking online for a sanctuary to help nurture these fierce creatures for release into the wild, I aimed to research thoroughly the sanctuary recommended to me. So how did I, an animal lover and conservation volunteer, find myself at the centre of an industry breeding the king of the jungle solely for hunting and for their skeletons? So the problem I had is that there were warnings, but when I checked with the agency that I booked with about those warnings, they told me that it didn't apply to the park that I went to. But the problem is that any park that lets you interact with lions, it's not going to be ethical if they're letting you work hands-on with lions. Every year, thousands of volunteers and tourists head to South Africa and visit lion facilities, usually self-described as a sanctuary, to cuddle, bottle feed and walk with lion cubs. Often these parks will state that the lions have been orphaned or that their mothers have rejected them, forcing them to be hand-reared. They'll tell you that they are preparing the lions for release into the wild, to live in their natural habitat. None of this is true.
So the cub petting, walking with lions, has no conservation benefit whatsoever. That has been stated time and time again by the recognized scientific community, by the recognized conservation community. If there was a benefit, those sectors would be supportive. Many of them have stated time and time again that it's a misdirection of funding, it confuses the conservation messages.
So the park that I volunteered at, there was about 15 to 20 volunteers actually on the park. And in terms of tourists, there was groups coming in every hour. There would be groups of school children passing around the lion cubs. But I'd say in a day, you're looking at over 50 tourists visiting a day. And that's as well as the volunteers that are paying £2 each to go and volunteer for 2 weeks.
I mean, so the student or the volunteer sector in South Africa has also become a very, very significant revenue stream. When we were doing the research for bloodlines, we literally came across facilities that were earning in excess of $100,000 a month from the volunteers.
They estimate that the volunteering industry is worth approximately $173 billion a year. It has evolved from people working with NGOs, fixing fences, helping to plant trees, to a huge business.
Students coming in believing they're contributing to conservation, when in fact they may well just be contributing to the exploitation of these animals.
There are a lot of people profiting from this, but unfortunately a lot of it is unregulated.
While I was volunteering, I realised pretty quickly that not everything was what it seemed. It was only when I got back to the UK I realised the extent of the problem and its connection to the shadowy world of canned hunting.
So can hunting, in simple terms, is the breeding of lions and other predators in captivity to be hunted in captivity. Today, those that are involved have tried to get away from the stigma of can hunting, so they've tried to change the name to captive hunting or high fence hunting, but it's all the same, because at the end of the day, the animal has been bred in captivity and it's going to be shot or killed in captivity or confined areas with very little chance to no chance, in fact, of escape. So the hunter is guaranteed the kill.
Ian Mickler's work on the film Blood Lions opened my eyes further to the issues facing lions today in South Africa and the heartbreaking chain of events that led the cubs that I raised to an unknown fate.
When this whole can hunting, issue broke in the 1990s, that was the focus. It was breeding lions in captivity to be shot in captivity. It was only really in the 2000s that we started drawing links between these so-called predator sanctuaries and the canned lion hunting industry. And of course, a little later, those that were involved in these industries cottoned on to the fact that there was actually a chain here, that they could breed the animals, they could then get involved in cub petting, they could then get involved in walking with lions once these cubs got a little older. And of course, the final step was you either sold them into a can hunt, you sold them for the lion bones, or you sold them for breeding stock to other breeders, to other operators. There's a very brutal chain of exploitation that begins with the breeding and goes all the way through to either lion bones or the canned hunt themselves.
Even as the canned hunting and lion bone trades grow out of control, volunteers and tourists seem totally unaware of the role they play while handling cubs.
When tourists visit lion breeding facilities or volunteers sign up for volunteer opportunities at such facilities, they're unwittingly supporting some really cynical aspects of the lion breeding industry. The international trade in lion bones is really something that's emerged in recent years as an issue, and it seems to be in part as a replacement for tiger bone in traditional medicines and other tonics and products. Now, there's absolutely no indication that lion bones or tiger bones or any other types of bones that are used in this way have any medicinal benefits for people. As demand increases and as people can see that they can make profits out of lion bone, this is likely to increase the incentives for poaching of wild lions and put beleaguered wild lion populations under increased pressure.
Over recent years, we've learnt why we shouldn't swim with dolphins, ride elephants, or have our photos taken with a tiger in Thailand. So now it's time that we add lions to this conversation. My trip took place in 2015, and when I searched for volunteering opportunities, there was an abundance of options of hands-on with big cats for me to choose from. I chose Live with Lion Cubs in South Africa, under the impression that I would be raising lion cubs abandoned by their mothers for release into the wild. 4 years on from my trip, and booking an experience with lion cubs is easier than ever.
What is particularly dangerous about the cub petting part of the chain here is that, of course, it's very easy to seduce families, youngsters, volunteers, gap year students into believing that part with your money, give us your $2,000 for your 2 weeks, you can pet these lions, you can bottle feed these lions, and of course, you're contributing to conservation. It's a very, very soft, cuddly storyline to sell, but of course, those people, volunteers or visitors, they go home and they don't follow the actual narrative or the life of that particular lion cub.
There's also a huge animal welfare issue here. These facilities are really cynical facilities, and if they're breeding lions for their skeletons, then there's no real incentive for them to look after those lions, and there is good evidence that on some of these facilities, lions are being underfed, they're very emaciated, because all they want as an end product is the lion skeleton.
So with our campaign, we target travel agencies that sell the trips, people that are posting on Instagram about it, people that are advertising the trips online. But even in our hotel on the Western Cape, we've found leaflets advertising cheetah interactions and lion interactions, and it's Conserve, Care and Connect, and a wildlife rehabilitation and awareness centre. So looking at these, there's no reason to think that what you're doing isn't benefiting conservation when it says it there on the leaflet. So to be fair, now when you do Google, at least in the UK, volunteer with lion cubs, you are met with warnings from Africa Geographic, from Wildlife Act, but they are still there if that's what you're looking for. When I looked for my volunteering trip, I aimed to be as ethical as possible and ask questions of the agency before booking. Every response I received assured me that there were no ties to canned hunting or the lion bone trade. But with such large amounts of revenue at stake, it's no wonder they convinced me to go and told me that my doubts were unfounded.
When they're cubs, there is that appeal. And I think there's a lot of farmers, particularly South Africa, probably who see where there's money to be made on this. And then there's a lot of agencies across the world who are then partnering with these farms to sell these projects under the guise of lion conservation. I think the volunteers are being misinformed because the sector is not being held accountable, and I think something needs to be done about this.
During my trip, I posted on social media, unaware of the harm and damage that I was doing. Through my experience, I was able to hear from other volunteers across the world, sharing our stories and trying to get the simple message across that lions are not for petting.
The social media pages carry a number of stories of volunteers who came onto these facilities understanding they were making a contribution to conservation, but then got to see what was truly happening. And I think it's very important that if you've had such an experience, do speak out. Tell your story on Facebook, post your images on Instagram, name the places, and tell the world about your experiences, because it's through these exchanges that others will be able to learn and will assist others in making more informed decisions.
I think if a volunteer is considering to work with lions, I think if there's any cubs, if there's any people contacting or touching the lions, if there's any predator interaction of any sort, I think you have to be very, very wary because clearly there's something going on which is not right. The volunteering industry really should not be involved in this at all.
Africa does need the support of volunteers. Africa does need the support for those wanting to make financial contributions to conservation. What we don't need is the misinformation, confusing of the conservation messages, and of course a complete misdirection of funding. The money needs to go to the proper organizations, not to businessmen, farmers who are running commercial operations.
Having been involved in such intricate levels of wildlife exploitation, I couldn't see a way of making up for the mistake that I had made. I have to face the reality that the lions that I raised may be a trophy on a hunter's wall. So I started Claws Out and launched this campaign so that other volunteers and tourists won't make the same mistake that I did. It's exploitation, not conservation. But we're not alone, and across the world, organisations, charities and individuals are uniting to protect this magnificent creature.
My name's Will Travers and I'm the president of the Born Free Foundation. When we talk about species under threat, we often talk about elephants or rhino or tigers, but now we need to talk about lions. There are perhaps 20,000 wild lions living across the whole of Africa. When I was a boy, I went to Kenya when the film Born Free was made in the early 1960s. There were probably 100,000 lions just in Kenya. It is a crisis, and that is a huge challenge to turn around. We can do something now for lions while there are still sufficient numbers across many African countries. In some countries, it might be too late. The population is so small, the lions are so scattered, and there's so much distance between each lion that literally they don't meet, therefore they don't mate, and therefore there are no more lions. But there are still strongholds. Kenya, Tanzania, Botswana, South Africa, and it's in those countries that we really need to pay attention. Because far from making the situation better, South Africa is making the situation worse. The up to 8,000 lions that are held in captive breeding facilities in the 300 or so lion farms where they are bred and petted and shot. That's not making things better for wild lions. That's not improving the conservation status of an imperiled species. In my view, it's going to make things a lot worse. So we need to close down those lion farms. We need to end any legal trade in lion body parts. We need to re-educate and inform market countries about just what the impact of lion body part trade may have and is having on wild lions. And we need to increase our efforts to protect lions and the habitats that they rely on. Lions are on a losing streak, and we can turn it round, but only if we take resolute action now. So think of lions when you think of elephants and rhino and tiger. They must not be forgotten.